Ancient Rome wasn't just an empire of conquests and marble monuments. Behind palace doors, Roman emperors indulged in sexual practices so twisted they'd make modern dictators blush. These weren't just personal indulgences. They were displays of absolute power that shaped Roman politics, religion, and society for centuries. From emperor-turned-prostitutes to incestuous marriages and human menageries, you're about to discover why Roman imperial bedrooms were the most disturbing seats of power in history. What you'll learn comes from documented historical sources that reveal how sexuality became the ultimate weapon of imperial control. To understand why Roman emperors behaved this way, you need to grasp how Romans viewed sexuality itself. In Roman culture, sex wasn't about love or even pleasure. It was about dominance. The person who penetrated held power. The person who was penetrated was subjugated. This wasn't just bedroom philosophy. It was the foundation of Roman social hierarchy. For emperors, sexual acts became political statements. When Caligula forced senators' wives to work in his palace brothel, he wasn't just satisfying lust. He was demonstrating that even Rome's most powerful men couldn't protect their families from imperial will. Every sexual encounter was a reminder that the emperor's power extended into the most intimate aspects of Roman life. Roman historians like Suetonius and Tacitus documented these behaviors not as gossip, but as evidence of imperial character. They understood that how an emperor conducted himself sexually revealed how he would govern the empire. A ruler who showed no restraint in private would show no mercy in public. The imperial bedroom became a theater where power was performed daily. Senators, foreign dignitaries, and court officials all understood that sexual access to the emperor, or protection from his desires, could determine their political survival. This created a system where sexuality and statecraft became inseparably intertwined. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known as Caligula, began his reign in 37 AD as Rome's golden boy. The people loved him, the Senate respected him, and the Praetorian Guard protected him. Within 4 years, he was dead, assassinated by his own guards who could no longer stomach his depravity. Caligula's sexual transformation began with his sisters. Roman law and custom strictly forbade incest, but Caligula openly conducted affairs with all 3 of his sisters, Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla. He didn't hide these relationships. He flaunted them. At public banquets, he would seat his sisters in places of honor typically reserved for his wife, making it clear to everyone present that family bonds meant nothing to imperial power. When Drusilla died in 38 AD, Caligula's grief took a disturbing turn. He declared her a goddess and made it a capital offense to laugh, bathe, or dine with family while the empire mourned. But his most shocking tribute was transforming the imperial palace into what historians call the Palace of Pleasure, essentially a high-end brothel staffed by the wives and daughters of Rome's elite. Caligula would summon senators to the palace, then force them to watch as their wives performed sexual acts with imperial slaves. He charged admission to these spectacles, turning sexual humiliation into a revenue stream. The emperor wasn't just breaking social taboos, he was monetizing them. The famous story of Caligula making his horse Incitatus a consul takes on new meaning in this context. While historians debate whether this actually happened, the sexual implications were clear to Romans. Caligula was suggesting that his horse was more worthy of respect than Rome's human senators, and that he could penetrate Roman political institutions as easily as he penetrated their wives. Tiberius Claudius Nero, who ruled from 14 to 37 AD, spent his final years on the island of Capri, where he created what historians describe as a realm of depravity. Roman historian Suetonius provides the most detailed account of what happened in Tiberius's island retreat, and it remains one of the most disturbing chapters in imperial history. Tiberius constructed elaborate swimming pools throughout his villa that served purposes beyond mere recreation. He forced attendants to participate in disturbing activities in his private baths. Historical accounts mention his little fishes, individuals forced to perform intimate acts for the emperor's pleasure. The emperor's appetites extended beyond these aquatic encounters. He established private chambers throughout the villa, dedicated to his various indulgences. Suetonius describes rooms decorated with explicit artwork that reflected the emperor's disturbing preferences and the activities he forced upon unwilling participants. Archaeological evidence from Capri supports these historical accounts. Excavations at Via Jovi have revealed unusually elaborate bathing facilities and private chambers that match Suetonius's descriptions. The villa's isolated location, accessible only by treacherous mountain paths, ensured that what happened there stayed there. Tiberius's disturbing behaviors weren't merely personal vices. They were calculated methods to secure his political position. Many of his victims came from prominent Roman families, and their humiliation served as leverage against potential political opposition. Those who had witnessed their family members suffer at Tiberius's hands were unlikely to support rebellions against imperial power. The emperor's death in 37 AD was met with celebration throughout the empire. Romans had endured his tyranny for over 2 decades, and his passing seemed to promise a return to civilized governance. They had no idea that his successor, Caligula, would make Tiberius look restrained by comparison.
Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, known as Elagabalus, became emperor at age 14 in 218 AD, and immediately began challenging every Roman assumption about gender, sexuality, and imperial dignity. Modern historians debate whether Elagabalus was transgender, but contemporary sources make clear that the young emperor rejected traditional masculine roles in ways that shocked even cosmopolitan Roman society. Elagabalus appeared in public wearing makeup, jewelry, and women's clothing. The emperor preferred to be called by feminine names and reportedly asked physicians throughout the empire to find ways to give him female genitalia. According to Cassius Dio, Elagabalus offered vast sums, enough to fund military campaigns, to any doctor who could perform what we would now call gender confirmation surgery. The emperor's sexual relationships scandalized Rome's religious establishment. Elagabalus married a Vestal virgin named Aquilia Severa, breaking one of Rome's most sacred taboos. Vestal virgins were supposed to remain celibate for 30 years, and their sexual purity was believed to protect the empire itself. By marrying Aquilia, Elagabalus was essentially declaring war on Roman religious tradition. But Elagabalus's most shocking behavior involved prostituting himself within the imperial palace. The emperor would dress as a female prostitute and solicit customers in the palace corridors, charging them for sexual services. This wasn't role-playing or private fantasy. It was public performance that deliberately degraded imperial dignity. The emperor's relationship with a chariot driver named Hierocles became the talk of Rome. Elagabalus referred to Hierocles as his husband and gave him honors typically reserved for imperial wives. At public ceremonies, the emperor would play the submissive role, allowing Hierocles to dominate him both sexually and politically. Roman senators tolerated many imperial excesses, but Elagabalus's gender fluidity threatened the fundamental basis of Roman masculinity. In a culture where sexual dominance determined social status, an emperor who willingly submitted sexually was an existential threat to the entire system. The Praetorian Guard assassinated Elagabalus in 222 AD, ending one of the most sexually revolutionary reigns in Roman history. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus ruled from 54 to 68 AD and transformed imperial sexuality into public entertainment. While previous emperors had conducted their sexual lives within palace walls, Nero brought his desires onto Rome's stages, turning the empire's theaters into venues for imperial sexual performance. Nero's most documented relationship was with a young freedman named Sporus, whom the emperor had castrated and then married in a public ceremony complete with wedding dress and dowry. Nero treated Sporus as his wife, appearing with him at public events and referring to him using feminine names. Roman audiences watched in fascination and horror as their emperor kissed and caressed Sporus during theatrical performances. The emperor's relationship with another freedman, Pythagoras, followed a different pattern. In this arrangement, Nero played the submissive role, allowing Pythagoras to penetrate him during public ceremonies that mimicked traditional Roman weddings. These weren't private affairs. They were staged spectacles designed to shock and entertain Roman audiences. Nero's sexual relationship with his mother, Agrippina the Younger, became the subject of intense historical speculation. Multiple sources, including Tacitus and Suetonius, suggest that Nero and Agrippina engaged in incestuous relations, though the exact nature of their relationship remains debated. What's certain is that Nero eventually had his mother murdered, possibly to end rumors about their sexual involvement. The emperor's theatrical performances often included sexual elements that blurred the line between art and pornography.
Nero would appear on stage in various costumes, sometimes as a woman, sometimes as a mythological figure, and engage in simulated or actual sexual acts with other performers. Roman audiences were forced to applaud these performances, knowing that showing displeasure could result in execution. Nero's sexual spectacles served a political purpose beyond mere entertainment. By forcing Rome's elite to witness his sexual performances, the emperor was demonstrating that no aspect of Roman life was beyond imperial control. Senators who had once considered themselves untouchable found themselves applauding as their emperor performed acts that violated every Roman standard of dignity and masculinity.
Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, deserves inclusion in any discussion of imperial sexual excess. While not an emperor herself, Messalina wielded imperial power and used it to pursue sexual adventures that shocked even Rome's jaded aristocracy. Messalina's most famous exploit involved a competition with Rome's most successful prostitute, a woman named Scylla. According to Pliny the Elder, Messalina challenged Scylla to see who could satisfy more partners in a single night. The contest took place in a public brothel, with spectators keeping count. Messalina won by servicing 25 men, while Scylla managed only 23. This wasn't a one-time adventure. Messalina regularly snuck out of the imperial palace at night to work in Rome's brothels, not for money, but for the thrill of anonymous sexual encounters. She would disguise herself with a blonde wig and take the name Lysiska, serving customers who had no idea they were paying for sex with the emperor's wife. Messalina's sexual appetite extended beyond prostitution into political conspiracy. She used sexual relationships to build networks of supporters and gather intelligence about potential threats to imperial power. Her lovers included senators, generals, and foreign dignitaries, all of whom found themselves compromised by their involvement with the empress. The empress's downfall came when she attempted to marry her lover Gaius Silius while still wed to Claudius. This wasn't just adultery, it was treason, since Roman law recognized only one legitimate marriage at a time. Messalina's bigamous wedding ceremony was conducted with full religious rites, suggesting she intended to replace Claudius with Silius as emperor. When Claudius learned of the marriage, he ordered Messalina's immediate execution. The empress was killed in 48 AD while hiding in the gardens where she had conducted many of her sexual adventures. Her death marked the end of one of the most sexually adventurous careers in Roman imperial history. Roman emperors didn't just commit sexual violence, they institutionalized it as imperial policy. The systematic rape of conquered peoples, the castration of male slaves, and the commodification of human bodies became standard practices that reinforced imperial dominance throughout the Mediterranean world. When Roman armies conquered new territories, sexual violence against the defeated population served multiple purposes. It demonstrated Roman power, humiliated enemy leaders, and provided entertainment for Roman soldiers. Emperors like Titus and Trajan made sexual slavery a cornerstone of their conquest strategies, ensuring that defeated peoples understood their complete subjugation. The imperial household itself became a center of sexual violence. Emperors maintained harems of enslaved women and castrated men, treating human beings as sexual commodities to be bought, sold, and discarded at will. These weren't hidden practices, they were public displays of imperial wealth and power. Castration became so common in imperial households that Rome developed a thriving industry around the practice. Young boys were purchased from throughout the empire, castrated, and trained for sexual service. The survival rate for these operations was less than 50%, but the demand for eunuchs was so high that the trade continued for centuries. The legal system reinforced these practices by denying enslaved people any protection from sexual violence. Roman law explicitly stated that slaves had no right to refuse sexual demands from their owners, and emperors used this legal framework to justify the most extreme forms of sexual abuse. Roman emperors didn't separate their sexual practices from their religious duties. They combined them into elaborate ceremonies that positioned imperial sexuality as divine worship. This fusion of sex and religion created some of the most bizarre rituals in ancient history. The cult of Priapus, the god of fertility and sexual potency, became central to imperial religious practice. Emperors would participate in ceremonies involving giant phallic symbols, sexual performances, and ritual prostitution. These weren't private religious observances. They were public spectacles that demonstrated imperial connection to divine fertility. Elagabalus took this fusion to its logical extreme by importing the Syrian sun god Elagabal to Rome and conducting sexual rituals in the god's honor.
The emperor would dress as a female priest and engage in sexual acts with male worshippers as part of religious ceremonies. Roman audiences watched in amazement as their emperor transformed religious worship into sexual performance art. The Bacchanalian rites, originally Greek religious festivals, became imperial sexual spectacles under various emperors. These ceremonies involved wine, dancing, and group sexual activities that were supposed to honor the god Bacchus. Emperors used these religious festivals as opportunities to engage in sexual acts that would have been scandalous in secular contexts. Sacred prostitution, practiced in various forms throughout the Roman Empire, received imperial patronage and protection. Temples dedicated to Venus, Cybele, and other fertility deities employed prostitutes whose sexual services were considered religious offerings. Emperors would visit these temples not just for sexual gratification, but to demonstrate their piety and connection to divine power. These accounts may seem shocking by modern standards, but they provide crucial insights into how imperial power operated in the ancient world. Roman emperors understood that controlling sexuality meant controlling society, and they used sexual violence, spectacle, and religious ritual to maintain their dominance over the largest empire in human history. If you thought Roman emperors were twisted, wait until you see our next video about the Byzantine empress who turned the sacred palace into something even more shocking. The sexual legacy of Rome continued long after the empire's fall, influencing rulers and religious leaders for centuries to come.